Hi, welcome to 2020 Tasty Treats with GourmetQuilter, where we're having a lot of fun in 2020 doing 20 different programs with 20 different blocks on this particular program. So we're doing foundation piece blocks this time. This is a diagram of the 20 different blocks we're making. They're not very large blocks. We've already made 11 blocks, so that's already very exciting. So we're on to block 12 this time. And the block 12 is in 6 different segments. So it's going to be a dragonfly. So it's quite exciting. I love making dragonfly things. So that's going to be hopefully really good. So if you've already registered with GourmetQuilter to receive the patterns, you'll receive a pattern like this that you can print and then cut the papers up and stitch the fabrics onto them, which is what I'm doing. So you always want to cut slightly larger. Now these pieces are fairly close in order to make them fit on the page. You may choose to have a second page printed so that you can cut larger margins around some of them, up to you. So it's going to be quite good. There, as I said, there's 6 segments. So one of the segments is just a piece of fabric. We've done this before where it's nothing in particular on it, but I've already gone ahead and I've got my piece ready and trimmed. I've used a little bit of the glue just to hold it together. I've actually done some of this block already, so I've made the lower wings. I thought they would be quite straightforward for you. It's just a piece of the wing colour and then a couple of smaller pieces in the larger piece. And again, I've gone ahead and I've used a bit of the glue just to hold that temporarily in place so that it all sits together nicely. I've gone ahead and made the head. It was just a piece in the middle with little corners around it and sides and a piece across the top. These are all things you by now know how to do. And I've made one of the top wings. So this time I'm going to show you one of the wings, the other top wing, and we'll just get started probably on the actual body. The body is very long and skinny, so we'll just have a little look at doing part of that as well, but I'm sure you actually know how to do all this by now. So I've got my pattern piece ready here. My wing colour is this nice bright green. So remember, wrong side of fabric to the wrong side of the paper. I'm going to pop a little bit of glue just to hold that wing fabric in place while we attach other small bits to it. It doesn't really matter what direction we put this as long as it all fits on the piece of fabric. And then I've got my piece, so that was piece 1. So then we've got piece 2, 3 and 4. So it's just a little bit to give a little bit of shape to the wing of the background fabrics. So piece 2 is very straightforward. Now we can just do a little fold line so that we position that comfortably, and I can go ahead and sew that on that line. So we're working with a slightly smaller stitch than usual. I've got a 1.5. My regular stitch is 2.5, so I've reduced it. I've got regular sewing cotton, 50 weight sewing cotton in my machine. I've got a regular sewing needle. Nothing particularly different that you need. The main thing would be to just reduce that stitch length, and what that does is it perforates the paper more frequently, so pulling the papers out later, which we will need to do, is easier, and also because we're pulling papers, it gives the seam a little bit more strength with the more frequent stitches. So I'm just going to press that. I trimmed it first, I'm going to press it, I'm going to put the next piece on. So that was piece 2, so piece 3 is now at an angle. So you may just want to do a little fold. Sometimes folding it backwards first helps a bit. You just need to make sure everything's going to fit. You know how to do this by now, I know you do. Make that fairly central to the piece and stitch along that line. So I'm just going to, because I had stitched into that little area, I'm just going to pull those little bits of paper away from the stitching there, fold it back on the stitching line and trim my seam. And I'm going to fold the paper out and press that. And I've just got one more little piece to go on just here. It's got a spare piece there. So same thing, I think I'll just pop a little fold line in so that I can see where to position that, because that just comes back on itself, and I can position that just there, make sure that's fairly central to my actual stitching area, and it is. And I'm just going to stitch along that line, but right out to the edge of the seam allowance, which is the dotted line. And again, pulling away from any stitching that's already been done. Press that down, trim the seam. Fold the paper out, pull the fabric out. Press it so that everything's sitting nicely. And now we can just go ahead and trim that wing up. So I'll quickly just do that. Now this has got those nice little trimmed corners on it as well, on each of the 3 corners. Makes such a difference when we trim it all up so that we can get a bit better idea of the shape, even though it's still got quite large, relatively large seam allowances. They're 1/4 of an inch, but because the blocks are relatively small, it seems like quite a lot of area of fabric is still showing that will get taken up when we do the seams. And that's that nice little one trimmed. Get rid of all my bits. And there we have our second wing. So that's looking pretty good. Pretty excited that the dragonfly is going to have 2 wings. It's always helpful because we've already done, or I've already done the lower wings. So they're going to go against those there somehow like that. And so what we need to do now is the body. So I'll pop these to one side again. And the body is fairly straightforward because really it's just striped. We're going to start at the top with piece number 1, and the same thing, I think, even though it's only little, I'm going to put a little dab of glue in that little area where the fabric will go, just for that first piece, and make sure that everything has got plenty of space around it. And then we're going to put the pieces on very straightforward, just sewing them along that line, and they'll just flip down. So I'll go ahead and do a couple, but I think this is quite straightforward for you. So I've stitched that, fold it back and trim it and press it. And then we put the next one. So we're just I'm alternating colours. You may want to do yours differently. So I'm just making sure there's enough there to cover the whole area that we're trying to cover. So we're stitching along this next line here. I'm stitching right out to the seam allowance so that it's stitched right the way across. Flip it back, trim it, and I'm going to press it. So I'm going to continue on putting the rest of my pieces on there, and then I'll trim that piece up. So it does come to a very fine taper in the fabric, but the area that we're trimming is not so fine, so it shouldn't be any problem. And when we stitch that in, as we'll see shortly, that'll come out really nicely as the little dragonfly body. So I'll just continue on with my pieces and see you shortly. So I've gone ahead and finished sewing my little pieces together. I've finished the body, I've trimmed it up. You saw me trim up the little wing. So now I'm just laying my block out ready for joining. So we need to work out which way we're going to join them together. So we've got a little unusual situation going on here because we've got what appears to be a slightly curved seam. It's not actually curved, they are sort of straight lines. However, it looks a little curved, but it'll be fine. So what we're going to do first is join the wings together first. So the 2 wing segments first, and then they'll fit nicely against the body, which will go in between there, and then we can put the head on, and then we can pop this piece across the bottom. So I'll go ahead and start joining up, popping a wing on, and we can then do the other side as well. I'll get this one ready. So I'm going to press the seam down on this one rather than open as I do sometimes. I think it's just going to sit a little bit better for us. So I can go ahead now and join the other side to that, and we can start joining this up here as well. In fact, I could probably go ahead and put that piece on there now. So we're going to lose, when this is joined in, we lose the very bottom bit. The tail doesn't go right to the bottom. It stitches to the bottom, but the fabric will end up being disintegrating or disappearing, I perhaps should say, before we get there. So I can go ahead and make the other wing side. I'm going to press that one, and again I'm pressing that seam to one side. I'm pressing it away from the body. So I'll go ahead and I'll join my other two wings and join them on to the body, and I might even get that bottom piece put on. I'll see how that goes. So as you can see, I've gone ahead, I've stitched my other wings together, I've popped the rest of the body together, and it's pulled together right to the bottom there, which is really nice, and I've put that single segment across there as well. So now what we have to do is put the head on. Poor guy can't see where he's going. So we're going to treat it like a little bit of a curved seam. So what I'm going to suggest that we do is put a pin in the center, so we know where the center of the body is, and we can see where the center of the head is, because well, for mine the stitching ends there where those little triangles meet. So I'm going to pin that there, and then I'm going to pull this around at the corner here, just so that they'll intersect right, these two pieces, right where the 1/4 inch seam should start. And I'm going to put a pin there as well. And if you want to, you could put another pin in between. I don't know, with the paper in it, it's holding quite firmly. And then we need another pin on the other end as well, so that we can stitch all the way across in one go. It looks a little bit unwieldy. However, that's the paper more than the fabric that's doing that. So maybe we do need another couple of pins in there. I'll just grab another 2 pins. I think it might be safer to put a pin in between. More pins is better with curves, so that it holds it together. Otherwise it may want to slip itself around, which is not always helpful. And I have to say, pins can be tricky for me. So as you can see, I've got all these pins. It's kind of gathering up a little bit, but it's all going to sit. As long as our edges are sitting nicely together, that should all sew beautifully. So I'll go to the sewing machine and stitch that. So if you put the pins in that way, quite often you can stitch over them. If you don't want to stitch over them, just pull them out just before you get to them, but don't pull them out too soon. Okay. Just ease it around a little bit into that center area. And if you want to, at this stage, leave your needle down and lift your foot up, and you can kind of rearrange that segment. It might make it hard for you to see, but it helps a little bit to pull it out of the way a little bit when you're going around a curve, because it's a little bit bunched underneath there. Otherwise it's all looking pretty good. I'm just feeling it moving just a little bit, so I'm just going to pull it underneath. Sometimes they want to move a little bit, so just keep an eye on your edges. Take it slowly, and you shouldn't have any trouble at all with this. And I'm just going to do a little back stitch there just to hold that into that seam. And so it's a little bit stiff because of the paper. However, things are all looking pretty good. By the time we've got all that paper torn out, And from this centre seam here, we probably could have pulled a little bit of that out before. That was a bit silly of me. But again, I'm going to press that seam down. It is extra bulky at the moment with all the paper. However, it won't be by the time we've pulled all those papers out. And that's going to sit really nicely. And here's your little dragonfly block. I think that's looking great. So all those pieces there come together. And so that was our block number 12. Oops, I might come over the other side here. And that little dragonfly is sitting in there quite, oh look, he's looking straight at that ice pop right above him. So that was block number 12 of our foundation piece blocks. Thank you, and please do look on GourmetQuilter.com if you're looking for some more information, and we'll see you again for block number 13. Thank you.